Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Ahsoka Episode 3, the brand new Star Wars series on Disney+. A show that I've been waiting for in terms of being a live-action adaptation essentially of an animated series from Star Wars. This one has been a really solid transition from the Rebels series to now Ahsoka here, with these characters coming to life in live action that has been very enjoyable so far. And I'm also very glad that this series is going to be 8 episodes long instead of the standard 6 from the general, Disney+ TV shows, because this was a shorter episode, but we still get a lot of action, a lot of great character moments in this episode that I do want to talk about in full spoilers. So this will be a spoiler review for episode 3 of Ahsoka. So if you've not seen the show up until this point this far, definitely go check it out. I'll also be talking about spoilers for the Rebels TV show, because I do think that some elements of that Rebels TV show, if you've not seen the show, is fairly important here. And after the first 2 episodes, it's like, okay, maybe it is important to just, or maybe you can just watch this show and not watch Rebels, but maybe just a recap is fine. But honestly, I think watching Rebels is extremely valuable to your enjoyment for the show in particular, because of that emotional connection that you gain with these characters. So like I said, spoilers, let's just jump right into this thing. And the first thing I want to talk about in this review is going to be basically what I ended off my last video on of the first 2 episodes, which was my predictions of what's going to happen in this series, and definitely my prediction of this Inquisitor type character named Marok. And I said in my last review that I believe that this character is going to be revealed to be Ezra Bridger, because you don't really know what happened in that time period where he's been missing ever since, Thrawn and him were on that ship and they flew away and they were presumed dead, and you didn't exactly know what happened to these characters. Although if Thrawn is stuck in another galaxy, maybe that's not the case, because how would Ezra then get back to this point? But the way that this character acts in this episode makes me more and more interested in that reveal of, if they decide to make this character somebody that we know, I think the obvious choice would to be making him Ezra, specifically because of how he reacted seeing the Purrgil in this episode. There seemed to be a focus on their reaction when they looked over at the Purrgil flying through the air, which, of course, seeing Purrgil in a live-action Star Wars series, not just in shadows that we saw in Mandalorian Season 3, but a full-on Purrgil flying through them in these clouds, was so incredible to see. I really love Steph Green's direction in this episode, particularly in that moment, because you get to see the scope and scale of these creatures in such a epic way, in a way that I didn't, obviously I was expecting to see these creatures in the show, but I wasn't expecting to be as awe-inspired by seeing them on screen. It was such a great moment. There's been a few little things in this series so far that's just got me extremely happy as a fan of Rebels and Clone Wars. For one, it was seeing Clancy Brown reprise his role as Governor Azadi in that first episode. I was so unreasonably happy to see him on screen, along with just hearing Ahsoka's theme in a live-action show, and seeing these Purrgil got me extremely excited as a fan of these animated shows. And so there's just been little moments like that has gotten me really excited, but that reaction in particular made me really subscribe to that idea that this character is Ezra. Again, I don't know how, because if Thrawn is stuck in a completely other galaxy, not able to come back to our main galaxy because he doesn't have this hyperdrive ship, this very specific ship that you need to be able to travel that distance, if he doesn't have access to that sort of thing, how would Ezra be able to come back, And there's a lot of things that, could possibly happen. I just don't know exactly how that can be the case, but it's just that reaction that got me thinking. I also think the character work between Ahsoka and Sabine has been great in the show so far, but this episode specifically highlighted that, furthering this mentor and mentee relationship that I was excited to see in this series, something that was, of course, not really covered in the animated series. This is, bridging the gap between Rebels and where we are now 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. And so there's all these dynamics that has been built off screen to get to finally see how they work together. And I love these 2 actresses playing these 2 characters. Honestly, I think that the transition has been fairly good so far. I did mention also in my last review that they're not as animated, of course. When you are having an adaptation from animation to live action, you're going to have that hit. You're going to have to take that hit of it not being as lively, as being as animated and as colorful, and the performances being the way that they are, but with all the things that have happened to these characters. Which, another thing I didn't think about is what happened to Sabine's family after the purge of Mandalore that we got to see in Mandalorian Season 3 and all that sort of stuff. So I really wonder if we're going to get into some of that backstory. But these characters feel like they've been through time. They feel like they've kind of hardened. Ahsoka feels a lot more mature and a lot more just, stoic in her older age, which is very different for Ahsoka, and you got to see that transition from her very rebellious and very innocent times during the Clone Wars all the way to her more mature take in Rebels, and now her even more mature and more stoic and heroic take in this show. And so she's grown a lot in this series, but you also get a very Ahsoka and very Clone Wars type moment that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about, and that is of course when she goes out into space and is on top of the ship fighting off the two ships that are coming and attacking them in this space battle, and she's just straight up in space walking around on a ship. And I know these Star Wars fanatics that are so pure on how things are supposed to work are going to be very angry at this, as they were with some things that happened in Last Jedi. But if you're going to be such a Star Wars purist, look at the last thing that George Lucas worked on, which was Clone Wars, and you have characters that also do that in that show that even I thought was a little bit like, I mean, it's animated, sure, they're in space, they're kind of running around, how is gravity working? But in this episode, they have a focus on her boots, and you hear the sound that's, maybe it's magnetically attached to it, so she can move around and kind of stick to the ship, and she also does float off at one point in time. And so they do focus on just the filmmaking itself and the visual clues and the audible clues that kind of cue you into exactly how this tech is working, and you don't need some explanation of how things work. It's a leap of faith, it's a suspension of disbelief to see her doing these things, but also it's a very Clone Wars thing to do in live action, because of course you got that sort of stuff in Clone Wars and Rebels all the time. And again, these small little things that I feel like you haven't seen in live action Star Wars before are getting me unreasonably happy, because you're seeing something that would happen more so in an animated series from Star Wars in a live action series. You are exposing these weird little animated quirks that you get to see in these animated shows to the live action audience that isn't used to these kind of things happening in their Star Wars. And maybe it'll go well, maybe it won't go well, but as a fan of these animated series, it put a smile on my face. And just the action in general in this episode, like I said, Steph Green did a great job in the intensity of this entire space battle, because pretty much this entire episode, it starts off with a nice conversation about the Force and how, Ahsoka and Sabine are really struggling because Sabine isn't very in tune with the Force. And I think that is also another really interesting storyline to cover in this series, because all the Jedi up until this point have been very talented in the Force, and Sabine was never trained in the Force. She only has some sort of, sense that she can kind of feel it at times, but she's not a Jedi per se. She's not somebody that can access it at a whim, essentially. She can't move a cup from one side of the table to the other, but Ahsoka still wants to train her because it's that discipline. It's that way that the Jedi are trained, and it's the way that she can eventually be in tune with the Force in a way that the Jedi themselves wouldn't have even given her a shot. But because of Ahsoka's relationship with the Jedi and how she left the Order and how she's doing things her own sort of way, again, this is a side of Star Wars that we never got to see before, kind of in the gray area of how the Jedi work. And I love being in the gray area in Star Wars. I love seeing this character be explored in this manner. And it's also cool to see her train Sabine in a way that isn't, how Anakin would train her, because there was this dynamic in Clone Wars that was very much like, Anakin would see Ahsoka do some sort of thing and kind of push her off on the side and be like, oh, you're not ready for this. And he walks away, and then it pushes Ahsoka to be like, you know what? I'm going to do it on my own anyway and be rebellious. And maybe she succeeds, maybe she doesn't, maybe she learns a lesson in that. But it was very much a sort of thing where Anakin wasn't a very good teacher, to be completely honest. Whereas Ahsoka is not giving up on Sabine. Yes, she did kind of give up for a while because Sabine wasn't ready to be trained. But now that Sabine is all in, she's being very patient with her in a way that I don't think Anakin would have been as a teacher. So again, the stuff that happened in these animated series, like I said, having that knowledge and that history with these characters has been helpful with this show in general, because you see these dynamics and you just think that it's, a casual thing, but I may be looking a lot more deeply into these decisions that Ahsoka is making because I am a fan of those animated series. But then we get straight into the action, the space battles, the reveal of this hyperdrive thing in the background was also really cool. And you also get a lot of great stuff with Hera that is happening with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and seeing Mon Mothma for the first time in a post, Return of the Jedi manner, which I don't think we have seen Mon Mothma since Return of the Jedi. And so that's a kind of a cool reveal to see that she's now the Chancellor of this New Republic. And you get some more of the politics that have been explored in Mandalorian Season 3 with how the old Imperial, workers have been moved over to the New Republic, which ones are loyal to just, working and being in the workforce in general and just, not really politically active in some sort of ways, or which ones are actually still, wanting the Empire to live longer, or wanting the Empire to grow back as something else in the future, wanting to be loyal to this thing that you thought has been collapsed, but they are now being ignorant to this growth in the background, in the shadows. And you get to see all this stuff building up to what is going to be Dave Filoni's movie. And again, everything that happened in Mandalorian Season 3, I have my reviews on that show as well. a lot of people said, yes, it didn't really fit in The Mandalorian, but I see all these shows as Star Wars, the TV series with Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, and now this, and you get to really see it building up to something really cool, and I'm excited to see how this turns into the First Order. I think a lot of people have this bias with the prequels of saying like, oh, I grew up with it, I actually think it's really good on paper, which to be fair, I do think the storyline, for the most part with the prequels, is pretty solid on paper. It did have a general plan that they followed, whereas, you know, the sequel trilogy didn't necessarily have a plan, and so it kind of is sitting in the same spot that the prequels were, where there's a lot of people who hate the sequels because of all the things that's missing with it, or all the things that people don't like about it. But, you know, Clone Wars did a lot to make me enjoy the prequels more. It kind of filled in those gaps. It made those relationships with, you know, Anakin and Obi-Wan a lot stronger. It made his turn to the dark side a lot stronger. And I can see these shows now on Disney Plus, whether it's the animated ones or these live action ones, building to something that feels a little more planned and a little more smooth of the transition from Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens. And maybe you can fill those gaps a little bit more. Maybe that Rey movie that they're going to do fills in some more gaps and kind of smooths over the transition and kind of makes these sequels feel a little more in place with Star Wars, because as always happens with Star Wars, is over time it is appreciated more in the future. And I hope that these shows do to the sequel trilogy, which the animated shows did for the prequel trilogy, for this new generation of fans. I really hope that that happens. But yeah, that is Ahsoka episode 3. It's not the longest episode in the world. There's not too much to talk about here. But again, everything in this episode was very, very well done, very well directed. The Purrgil was great. The relationships between Sabine and Ahsoka is growing in a very natural and very exciting way. And the stuff with Hera is getting interesting. And all of it is building in a way that I think that it could be a really solid 8-episode series. I'm very glad that it is 8 episodes, because if we were only halfway through the series so far, I think it would be a mistake. I really hope they reveal this, you know, Marok character, this Inquisitor character soon, to be Ezra or to be someone else, or if that never happens at all, then okay, oh well, then Ezra's off, you know, in the distance with Thrawn. But I really hope by the end of the next episode, we're really getting to that sort of thing, so we have the entire back half of the series to focus on Thrawn and Ezra and all that stuff. I really hope we get to that soon, because I think some of the other Disney Plus shows, whether it's Marvel or Star Wars, has kind of saved some big reveals and some big, you know, stuff with the villain characters for the last like episode or two, and it ends up feeling rushed by the end of each season. So I hope that is revealed sooner than later, so it doesn't have to feel like you wasted all this time in the first half of the season, you know, building this stuff up to, you know, quickly brush it off the side in the last couple episodes. So I hope that doesn't happen with this show. So I'm hoping the next episode we get some big reveals when it comes to those sort of things. I at least want to see Thrawn in the least in the next episode, so I'm very excited to see how that transfer is done over from animation to live action. So what do you guys think of Ahsoka so far? Are you guys enjoying it? Are you guys not enjoying it? Have you seen Rebels? Are you enjoying the ride so far with Ahsoka? I'm very curious to hear all your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, leave a like I said, comment down below, and I hope to see you all in my reviews from this point on.